Yeah, I'm joined now by my good friend Michael Brooks of the Majority Report. Let me just set something up here for Michael. He's not only of the Majority Report, he's also of Two Dope Boys and a podcast. And I don't know about you. I listen to it on a regular basis. There's not many podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis. Two Dope Boys is one. And I really enjoy the work that he and Phil are doing over there. Mike, how are you, man?
Great to be talking with you, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How's the weather down there in New York?
It's getting terrible. It's getting cold, but I look forward. I know that, Citigroup is going to be flying you and I out to Barbados in a couple of weeks for the secret Illuminati meeting.
Exactly.
So I'm looking forward to that. And,
man,
yeah, because,
people
Clinton
tell it.
Cash isn't nothing.
Dude, like Clinton Cash don't play, man. Like I'm rolling in the dough, man.
Yeah, that's real.
I'm literally not working in the mornings and then coming to do the show at night because I get paid so well from Clinton. Folks, what we're talking about, me and Michael, we just been kind of joking about how quickly he and I and people like us who don't toe any particular line. For me, I just like to sit in the gray, right? I like to sit in that uncomfortable area where we're going to consider everything. And very quickly after the primaries, we became outcasts. Like we are the pariah. We are the sellouts, man. Tell me about, like, I talk about it in my perspective all the time on my show. So I'm not going to bitch too much tonight. Tell me what you've run into since the primaries and tell me how you are a sellout and you're a shill for Hillary.
Well, obviously, first and foremost, it's the Barbados thing. And I enjoy it immensely. Look, I think on one hand, no doubt with the Majority Report, we've cut a distinct line. And fortunately, a lot of our audience likes it or accepts it to some degree. Mm-hmm. And that is that, and I said from the very beginning, and we talked about it on the show, I was a very adamant Bernie Sanders supporter. I have a very strong critique of the Clintons. But I always said from the beginning, too, that not only would I, support Hillary if unfortunately she was the nominee, mm-hmm. but also that we need to think about politics in terms of structure and institution and less about personalities. It's fun to make fun of personalities, yes, and personalities matter to some extent. But even just with Hillary, this notion that you can understand her through the personal filter of her, whatever you think of her, whether you think that she's, and I happen to think that people on many sides of the equation have very overwrought, melodramatic, and frankly, oftentimes just stupid in both pro and anti-Hillary directions views of her. But in some ways, that's besides the point. So even if you look at those WikiLeaks documents, and I did a segment about this recently, the biggest conclusion is, first of all, it confirms the obvious. I don't think it's any shock to anybody who was strongly on the side of Bernie during the primary that, of course, the sort of more mainstream elite Democratic institutions would be, pro-Hillary. That's not remote surprise. Mm-hmm. And then in other areas, it actually reveals that, she's susceptible to pressure on things like TPP because she's in the Democratic Party. That's the key point here. It's about institutional pressure and institutional structure. On the flip side, Donald Trump, who again, I always thought he'd win the Republican primary, and then I always thought he'd lose pretty comfortably in the general and then launch a TV network. So
that's
the calls
exactly
are going pretty well for me so far. Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. But I think the thing with Donald Trump, even, people want to kind of do this silly spin that, he's unpredictable, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't need to be. The ways in which he's unpredictable are dangerous. Mm-hmm. And then the ways which they're predictable are obvious. Paul Ryan sends him a disgusting budget. He signs it. It's not that complicated. Again, it's institutions.
Well, so, Mike, let me jump in there. Let me jump in there only because I really don't want to be. I hear you. I really don't want to talk about Hillary. Because I really brought you on to talk about NATO. But more importantly than NATO, more importantly than NATO is the fact that they call us sellouts. No, I'm just being an asshole at this point.
Sure.
But you said something so important, man. You said something so important that made me almost jump out of my seat. You said we have to stop looking at politics through the lens of personality and look at it through the lens of structure and institutions. And man, I swear that's so important. I was formulating that exact thought in my head this week. And the reason I was doing it was really on the international relations, foreign policy front. Because if we continuously, and even domestically, it fits. It's like a universal paradigm almost. If we continue to look at people and to say this person is good, that person is evil, we are completely incapable of giving a serious analysis of what's going on. Then we are completely incapable of giving a solution or even offering an idea of a solution, because we're stuck in this good versus evil paradigm that is completely irrelevant. What's relevant is our institutions and
it's
forces.
Childish moral games.
Exactly.
It's childish moralism. And it's not solving anything. And nobody who is on the receiving end of anything has time for that. And I'll just say in 30 seconds, look, and of course, I've been a sellout and I've heard all this nonsense targeted at me. I'm someone where, at least as an example of an issue like poverty, I'll say in my background and my upbringing, that is not an abstraction to me. That's something I've dealt with very seriously in my life. And I take an approach to politics that's a hybrid. I have very, very committed left politics. I probably have more left politics in many ways than
me?
Some sort of anti-Hillary commandos on Twitter. But I also take my job, as a for lack of a better word, an educator seriously. There is some role in that, what we're doing. I'm here to promote a very specific set of values and policies, and I'm also trying to help people understand the way the system works more effectively. And simplistic moralism never going to get you there.
Never, ever, ever, ever. And I swear, people, I read comments all the time. It's something I shouldn't do, but I do, because it just makes me numb to anybody. Like, I'm completely dead to the world when it comes to comments. I'm like, bring your best, because I'm the biggest troll of them all. But I was reading some comments, and one person wanted to make it clear that in the case of Assad versus Obama, that I was telling them, don't make Assad a hero, right? Don't make him a hero because he's on the opposite side of American imperialism. But then they made the comment of, Ben doesn't want to say it, but Obama is as evil as Assad. And I'm like, that statement is the most useless and most irrelevant statement of them all, because it has nothing to do with moral perspective. It has nothing to do with morality. It has everything to do with the structures that surround these people who lead these states that are interacting in a anarchical society that really, it's almost the Wild West, and the only thing that really matters are the structures that constrain them. If all you care about is America is evil, then you're completely incapable of even giving us a solution on how to make America better. Thank you so much for saying that, because that's something I hadn't even voiced yet on my show, but I was just thinking that this week. I was putting that together, and you put it so succinctly. Let's shift gears and talk about NATO, Russia, and actually I want to throw Syria in there. Let's talk about foreign policy for a bit, because there's a lot of craziness going on. So we were reading an article from Reuters about the buildup, NATO's buildup, Russia's response. And I want to, instead of just going into so much the specifics of that one article, I want to get your opinion on this thought that I've been going back and forth with people on. The question always comes up, why is Russia being aggressive? Then people automatically counter and say Russia's not being aggressive except for NATO being aggressive. And then the counter argument to that is that NATO's being aggressive because some of the member states are one generation away from being a part of the USSR. And when they saw the Ukraine, or when they saw Crimea and they saw the Georgian war, it fosters this type of response. So too long didn't read. NATO is being aggressive because they see Russia being aggressive. It's like the chicken or the egg. I want to see, what's your take on who's being the aggressor, or are we in sort of that black box buildup where that arms race, not the specific arms race, but the concept of an arms race is we don't really know what country X is doing, so we better escalate. and then country X is saying, I don't know what country Y is doing, so we better escalate. So what do you take it as? Is it someone is a clear aggressor in your opinion, or do you think it is a natural escalation on both sides?
It's all of the above, and I'll be really specific about that.
Okay.
There is no doubt that Russia has been playing an increasingly aggressive and bold role, arguably actually even going back to 2008 in Georgia. Now, no doubt, we have aggressively pushed NATO expansion. That's problematic from a Russian perspective. And there's different, sort of views and disputes, as an example. I mean, there was a big conflict, I remember a couple years ago, and then the pipeline from Turkey ended up sort of failing, but you had two major German politicians who had been in government together. They were on opposite sides of different pipeline contracts, one coming from Russia, the other coming from Turkey. So some of this is just geopolitics. And this is, and again, I mean, when you're talking about geopolitics and client-state relationships, moralism is like the last thing that is in the calculus. Now, from an American perspective, I would say this. I would like, now, again, let's make some distinctions really briefly. Hillary Clinton's not going to bring us into a war with Russia. That's delusional. I do think that she will be much more aggressive in a proxy war in Syria. She might give Syrian rebels more sophisticated weaponry. And the reality is, from a power politics perspective, and this has happened in many conflicts before, including ones that were much more dangerous, as an example, Afghanistan in the 80s or Vietnam in the 60s.
Yes.
There are lines where it's like, okay, if Russia actually says, if you do this, this will lead to a certain level of actual conflict between us, that's not going to happen. And if you actually go to some Russian media sources that aren't sort of just like silly propaganda, and again, I do think that there's some Russian interference in this campaign. I think that that's probably valid. But if you go and read, some Russian foreign policy outlets and places like that, they're preparing for Hillary Clinton being president. They don't like her, but they experience her as pragmatic. They've experienced her as Secretary of State. Now, the second brief point that I would make is the search for heroes in these situations is foolish. I know some people want to make Assad something that's mind-blowing to me. On a human rights level, he has a higher body count than ISIL. In some respects, he actually orchestrated groups like ISIL being his prime opposition, because very cannily he saw that they would be, that the world's attention would turn to them. And also, again, nobody wants to acknowledge this, but the reality is that in 2011, the initial uprisings in Syria were a genuine civil society uprising. You've made this point, Benjamin, and I can attest personally, like, I have met and, known, had privileged to interact with, Syrian filmmakers and activists and people who are, on the ground there smuggling out information. Started as a human rights movement. Now, on the flip side, the last thing I'll say, well, that's two quick points. Undoubtedly, the United States has, especially with Syria, we've outsourced in the beginning, sort of weapons procurements and to the Gulf states, which have a lot of sympathies for these terrorist groups. I don't think we've played a constructive role at all in Syria, and I think a no-fly zone is a potentially very dangerous overstep, and we do need to cool relations with Russia. And in all of these situations, if you're looking for groups to support and you're looking for, some type of sense of justice or leftist solidarity, then that's what you should look for. Right. I would say that some of the Kurdish fighting forces certainly represent that. And in some of their own autonomous zones, they're actually implementing incredibly progressive, almost anarchic government. And they happen to be actually in some ways sort of informally on the side of sometimes Iran, sometimes the United States. And, that's just the reality. But the groups, if you're looking for people to have solidarity with, are going to be rebel fighters, they're going to be guerrilla fighters, and they're going to be actually on the left. Bashar al-Assad is a trust fund baby neo-fascist who's killed tens and maybe even hundreds of thousands of people. And this enemy of my enemy is my friend is a problematic statement to begin with, let alone if you're not even on the ground actually having to figure out and make compromises. You're just sitting in a YouTube chat room. I would really consider whether you want to throw a comment up like that when you think about, starvation and torture rooms and bombing of civilians and everybody else.
You know what? So, man, you said so much. Damn it. That's why I like having you on. But like, I would have to rewind to actually unpack everything you said. No, I'm not. I mean, and you know me. I don't bullshit. I don't blow smoke up people's ass. Like, you said a lot. And one of the things that stood out the most, you said that expecting Hillary to start World War III is ludicrous. Yes. But then you simultaneously said she is going to be more aggressive. Russia is preparing for that. And then you close the deal with me by saying, the no-fly zone is a step too far. Right. But you're putting it in context.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed is that a lot of people would like to simplify this to make a moral judgment and say Hillary is evil because of these reasons. And it's really diluting the critique from the left, and it's making the left. And I'm not saying, I can't say categorically, right? So not every person, let me just say that it's not every person, but it's some people that I admire who are becoming tacit apologists for Assad in order to continue a anti-American imperialism critique of the West. And I'm like, it's very possible for us to exist in both spaces, right? To condemn American imperialism and condemn the Assad regime because of the true start of at least one of the reasons the revolution started was because of a true pro-democracy movement over there from a left perspective. Like, there is a place for us to stand in this argument that doesn't require us to take the side of America, doesn't have to take the side of a no-fly zone, and it doesn't require us to take the side of Assad. And it's like people are oversimplifying it. Why? And it's coming from really smart people too. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that actually has always confused me, and I agree with you. It does sometimes come from people that I admire, respect, and agree with, much of their analysis. It does seem to be this sort of, and I'm not kind of speaking for any specific people here, but I do think that there's some. How do I articulate this? I think that there's no problem if you have an emotionalism around your values in politics. So when I hear someone say that, they could care less about the fact that the United States is coordinating with and supplying Saudi Arabia in what they're doing in Yemen, and they don't care about the human rights consequences. I think that's a morally disgusting statement.
Right.
And I think it's a morally disgusting statement to, excuse what Assad has done. And I think that that's where, we make moral judgments and emotions play a role. But then I think that there's a time when people they do allow emotionalism and a personalization to shape all of their views. And then it becomes a shortcut for analysis. It's almost like, the fear that, if there's any type of complexity in the assessment, then we're going to be excusing U.S. actions. Now, I will say this. Look, if I was on, I go on, CNN or something, I would present the same perspective, but I would probably emphasize cooling down U.S. bellicosity because that's, relevant for that audience. I think actually for our audiences, in some ways, it might sometimes be more valuable to be like, no, Russia is a brutal power politics player like any other, and Bashar al-Assad is a truly obscene human rights violator.
Dude,
by the same token, again,
Go ahead. Finish that thought.
No, but by the same token, he might actually be part of a negotiated process that concludes the conflict. And that's a real shame, but that's reality.
Right.
That this is actually something that we're seeing in Africa with the ICC. It's another perfect example of a conversation where you can simultaneously say, a country like Gambia, why are they rejecting the ICC? Well, because they commit serious human rights abuses. And at the same time, does the ICC disproportionately focus on the continent?
Yes. And
probably is never going to hold, Western leaders and Western war criminals in the same way? Absolutely. Well, both of those things are correct. And then what do you do? Well, actually, I think from the perspective of, someone in Burundi, they still might say, those are fascinating and important conversations. And the president just ordered a death squad to kill my family, and I'd like the ICC to be involved.
Right.
That's, my view. But we need to take all of those variables into account.
Thank you, man. Listen, this is I have to do this because it's too important not to. It has to be, and I like what you added there. You added one more layer of complexity. This is I'm disappointed with the left when we reduce things down to talking points and oversimplified reductions so that we can make a point, to just say it bluntly. We just want to make a point, and so we reduce it. But you added another layer of complexity there, which is worthwhile noting. Like with the ICC, we have a nuanced conversation, right? There, the West is not going to be held accountable. Nations in Africa will overwhelmingly and disproportionately be held accountable. Almost similar to, like,
Absolutely.
just a brief parallel is similar to white people committing crimes at about the same rate, but black people getting targeted. It's that same feeling. But the layer of complexity that you added on top of that is that you have some people there on the ground who are in desperate need for the ICC to intervene. Right. So it's got to be like we are capable people of holding all of these seemingly contradictory positions in our head and finding a resolution. And in that resolution is a real answer. We cannot just reduce it to simplistic, moralistic arguments, because that is not helpful. And that is something that I despise about the right. I've been despising it in this election from the Hillary Clinton camp. I just really hated to see it sneak up in the left. And people who support Bernie Sanders and now support Jill Stein. I really hated to see that. And the other thing that you said that I really wanted to bring out is that America does need to roll back. And I think you and I and other people like us, we were saying this as soon as we saw the red baiting taking place with Bernie Sanders way back in like December of last year. We were like, hold on, this is a road that we don't need to go down. And unfortunately, while we're over here balancing the nuances, Hillary Clinton's side of the equation, they are like doubling down on ridiculous language that is problematic and definitely unnecessary. It's politically, it's helpful for them domestically, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. But in our relationship with Russia, it's unnecessary. I want to show a tweet on my screen from Michael Weiss, and I'm sure you saw this today. This idiot said. Tweet, quote, hardly a risk of an open-ended conflict with Russia and Syria. Entire Russian deployment could be wiped out in 48 hours by U.S. Putin knows this. Now, Brooks,
right.
like this type of language, not only is it inaccurate, right, because there's nothing going to be wiped out in 48 hours and Russia does nothing about it. That doesn't happen. But then just the language itself pushes a bravado that is unnecessary and that we don't want to back up. It's not for us to have this type of language out there, except for the highest levels where you have to just lay down the law because we are in an anarchic international order. Sometimes you have to lay down the law, but we don't need the sentiment, the general consensus in the population to be so bellicose that we can pull a trigger or go to war unnecessarily. And you see this type of language coming from the right in the build up to Iraq. And now we're seeing it come from, quote unquote, the left, but really just the neoliberals and the liberals and the chicken hawks. Why are, and it's a stupid question, but I have to ask it, what the hell is going on? Why are people going down this road?
Three quick reasons. I think one, especially the Clintons and the Clinton sort of generation are still defined by this obsession with proving that even though maybe they marched against Vietnam and they supported George McGovern, that they're quote unquote tough, whatever that means. And it's embarrassing. Several years ago, around the time of the invasion of Iraq, Bill Clinton said something to the effect of, voters would prefer you be, sort of strong and wrong than weak and right. And, that's a fun sort of like, Bill Clinton kind of dispensing some Southern political wisdom. It's actually pretty appalling when you're using that in the context of, justifying the greatest, human rights and sort of foreign policy blunder, arguably in some ways in American history in terms of invading Iraq and, war in general, exactly. So I think that that's their political lineage. And I think that they see an opportunity to flip the script on Republicans. You've been calling us soft and blah, blah, blah for how many years, and now, you're the Russian puppets. So I think that that's part of it. I think there's also just, it's an easy political, it's a layup, as you point out.
Yep.
It's right there. And number three, ironically, I mean, it's hilarious to say this, right? Because we can say if we're, as, still pretty young people, we're old enough to remember, I don't know, was it 2012? When everybody was mocking Mitt Romney for being such a drama queen about Russia. And now, all of a sudden, we are, getting into this language and incredible just sort of over, drama. And, and I don't understand why Russia specifically as a country, it really seems like very few people on either side of the equation, and I am not, Russia's an area that I know less about than, certainly in like the Middle East. But it seems to me that people are, there's this weird sort of, I guess the pejorative would be like the Pravda left, and they want to, justify everything that Russia does, even though Russia is actually like a right-wing, like petrochemical mafia state.
Yeah.
And then there are, the mainstream policy consensus from the, obviously the neocons and the right, but through many neoliberals that just constantly want to sort of demonize Russia and not really just sort of understand it as a just, cynical kind of mid-rank superpower like any other. And we need to start having a realistic conversation about Russia again pretty soon, because we do need to do important things with them, like, arms control. That's somewhat significant.
So here's you said something that me and my intern here, man, we cracked up laughing about, but it's almost like Mitt Romney was so prescient with that. He was so spot on, and we laughed at him. We laughed him to scorn, like, because it was so ridiculous. And me and my dude, we were laughing like, what if the Mormon Church just has like the top intelligence agency that we just don't know about? Because Mitt Romney was so spot on with that it's almost creepy. And it's like, or was he just like, just lucky, wrong clock, a dead clock or whatever is right twice a day. But I want to ask you how you rationalize something. How do you resolve this tension? You see the bellicosity of the language. You see the problematic nature of the language. You see the saber rattling of the Clintons, and you see their motivations. Yet you said that you just don't see it going to war. I have a resolution in my mind. I want to know, how do you resolve that in your mind? That if someone who is who has as much bravado and as much to prove as Hillary Clinton is going down the road of using this type of language, how do you reconcile your statement saying that you just don't see it going to war with Russia?
Oh, well, I mean, again, I think this is just also, I mean, I know that statements like this really pisses a certain kind of Twitter commando off, but this is just politics. And she's gonna win, and she's gonna get into office, and there's gonna be meetings, and even right now, I mean, we're at a really low point in Russian relations, and actually, John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov have a workable relationship. Communication lanes are open. And again, if you go in, Juan Cole has a really smart post about this where he tracks what some, again, I would say maybe more sort of sophisticated opinion in Russia has on Hillary Clinton in terms of more foreign policy and journalistic elites in Moscow. They think of her as very pragmatic. They think of her as intelligent. And I also think with specific, of course, to Russia, to Syria as an example, even the no-fly zone has serious concerns within the U.S. military establishment.
Yeah,
so I don't know if she would ride roughshod over that. Then you look at surface things like giving them surface-to-air missiles. Well, that could jeopardize Israel. And, Hillary Clinton is certainly, and that's another conversation which I have,
another day,
profound disagreements, obviously. But regardless, I mean, she is not going to sort of in any way want to jeopardize Israeli security. So I think that I think that she's going to be looking for some wins. I think you can learn from, Chinese and American relations have deteriorated significantly because of South China Sea hacking and other issues. But you know what? Obama has built a great bridge on climate change. He's built a great bridge. You just saw it with the Kigali Accords that just happened, going back to sort of ozone depletion stuff. That just came through and was solidified in Kigali. And that came down to China basically agreeing to phase out a bunch of pollutants and, synchronizing with the United States. So if you can get some type of arms control agenda back on the table, cool things down a bit, or, we could keep slugging on, and it's bad and it's problematic and it's dangerous. And I just want to say, that's bad enough. The situation as we have it is bad enough.
Yeah.
But the notion that, she's going to come in and actually push the button to start World War III, if people are meaning that literally, that's just not a grounded view. If you're saying this escalation and troop movement and everything else could lead to unintended consequences down the road that could be really dangerous, I'm much more receptive to that argument. I think that's real.
Yeah, I absolutely. That's the only way, and that conversation actually requires more than 140 characters. That's why a lot of people just reduce it down to something that is obscene. And I'm like, no, we have to give space, even if it's just on Twitter. You're like, you have to give space for a more nuanced conversation that doesn't reduce everything down to this person is evil, therefore the person opposing them must be good, because that has created some insanity that I've seen on the left that is very, very, very disappointing, but not disappointing to the point that I'm going to throw them out the window, because I'm sure I'm wrong on something. Right, we're all wrong. Listen, Michael, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure, man. Everybody, I want you to check out Two Dope Boys in the podcast, where they mix in culture, they mix in politics, they mix in, it's really worth a listen. So I want you to go over there, check it out. Mike, tell them, get the last word, and tell them where to find you.
First of all, man, thank you so much. I just love talking with you. It's always great, and I appreciate. Just good thinking and good clarity, which you always bring. Two Dope Boys in a podcast. It's Two Dope Boys Pod. Is what you can find us on the website. Then you could just go into iTunes. It's the number two Dope Boys in a podcast. It's 2 shows a week. We've got a revolving crew of people. It's race, politics, culture, trends. And of course, I'm on the Majority Report every day, and I host that on Mondays. And, you'll find pretty similar kind of opinion there as well. And, at _Michael Brooks on Twitter. You can come at me. I'll tell you to go fuck yourself. And, we could do it on there, too.
Don't come for me, dog. Don't come for me, man. Don't come for me.
Yeah, don't come for me. I'm there. Bring it.
Hey, the worst place in the world. I'm actually nicer on Twitter than I used to be. The worst place in the world to come for me these days is in the YouTube comment section, because I have no shits to give. I don't care. I could have 1,000 people unsubscribe and I won't even care, man. You come for me with something. If you come with me, here's the other thing though. If you come correct with something and a flaw in my argument, I will sit down and listen, because I'm not right. I want to learn. I want somebody to be smarter than me. I have a guy who works with me who's like 23, and he is one of the smartest dudes I have ever met in my life. And he actually has schooled me. Like, I had to sit down and listen. So it's not that I can't be wrong. It's that if you come for me, you just better come correct. And I think that's what I just heard you say, Mike. Mike, it's a privilege, man.
Can I tell you something really quick about
you? Yeah, go for it, man.
A second?
Yeah, go for it. Go ahead.
I remember one time I remember, and I wish, I might not be able to do this impression anymore, but I remember I used to read the YouTube comments, and I stopped because I remember this dude, some dude, and I don't know why this of all things got me, but he basically was like, I hope that ISIS beheads Michael Brooks. And I was like, damn, that's a little extra. And I remember the girl I was dating at the time was from Trinidad, and she was just like, people are very brave behind the keyboard. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Fuck out of here.
That's it, man. They're super brave out of the behind the keyboard. Hey, man, I'll see you on the internets, man, and I'll holler at you when I come down to New York, and let's talk again on the air soon.
Great.